It'll be interesting to see when politicians start to grapple with those questions, because I feel as though that's a real hot button topic that no one wants to go near, which is, okay, we're going to have an immigration policy, but who are the right immigrants? And I know, particularly here, one of the conversations you can typically see playing out is if anyone tries to challenge the current status quo around mass immigration, you'll have those who are more supportive of it saying, oh, so you want to sort immigrants into good immigrant, bad immigrant. And the thing is, and from an economic perspective, it actually sounds like those kind of immigrants, at least at a group level, and as we've already talked about, so I'll put a caveat in there, is there's always exceptions, but economically you can start to see data, particularly in the UK, that's starting to show particular groups and nationalities that are much more dependent on the state over the long term. And you picked up something in your book, which in one ways is totally heartbreaking as well, insofar as you said that groups of people with strong family values and strong ties tend to have lower wages, lower economic outcomes, and reliance on government support. And the thing is, outside of the West, most people have those, right? Is actually one thing that we decry here in Britain is there's a big conversation about being the loneliest country in Europe. And obviously there's a long tail off the back of, Catholic Church decision to clamp down on clannishness and become much more of a universalist preacher. And maybe we're just very far downstream of that. And I find that interesting that most groups of people, particularly outside of Europe or people who have seeded from European nations, are going to come from strong family tie backgrounds. And you can see it in the data that there's much more reliance on government support.
Yeah, this is something that Alberto Alesina of Harvard, who passed away much too young, that he documented in some work, basically work on family values and the regulation of labor. And it turns out that people who come from strong family values countries are more likely to want the government to regulate the labor market. So that's a correlation, and then economists come along and theorize about the causation, right? That's our job. But once we report the candid correlation that folks who come from strong family values countries are more likely to demand strong government labor regulation, making it harder for the boss to fire you, requiring minimum wages, things like this. These are things that a lot of people on the political left would say, hey, that's a great idea, right? But those of us who are economists, those of us who are sort of more or less proud neoliberals, we say, gosh, all those frictions are going to be a barrier to innovation, a barrier to starting up new companies, a barrier to shutting down unproductive companies. So it's going to make your country poorer in the long run. And so family values are a big tax on the government directly. They're a big tax on government regulation and seem to push it in a way from the values that most economists would embrace, which are these values of innovation. But notice, if we think about it in the simplest way, like most stereotypical way, Northern versus Southern Europe, that Northern individualism, that interest in treating all people equal and treating strangers as basically morally quite similar to your family, those are strange values historically. And that strange set of values is part of what helps get us neoliberalism and laissez-faire and high productivity. So realizing that that basically being meaner to your family, not being willing to favor your in-group very much is part of the path to prosperity. That's a difficult lesson to come to. But once we realize those values are intergenerationally transmitted, we can be pretty sure that this is going to have implications for the long run. If nations choose to, whether they choose to do it or whether they do it accidentally, if you have a lot of migrants coming from strong family values countries, that'll put pressure on your government to have stricter labor market regulations, worker protecting, and employer disfavoring labor market regulations.
Well, I think we're starting to see the tide turn even amongst nations that would have typically been much more predisposed to social welfare. Sweden's a great example, and I'm sure you will be well aware of people who lean politically left within your country and anywhere else that looks to the Scandinavian countries and go, look at what they do, and they've got such high social trust and they can do X, Y, Z. But it's quite interesting that in Sweden, they have started to cool off on their welfare system because of the big influx of migrants since 2015, which I can't remember exactly the percentage, but it's, at least 10%, if not approaching 20% of foreign-born people in the population. And now the Swedes, who typically have been held up as a model of social welfare, we now see that trust is eroding because of that civic conflict arising with the greater ethnic, religious diversity.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of libertarians get excited about, right? Libertarians think, well, we'll bring in a lot of migrants from other countries, and we expect that the people in our country will dislike the new migrants, and that will weaken social trust and will weaken the government voter support for a strong safety net. And so this is all great news if we basically increase social disharmony as an indirect way of weakening support for the safety net, right? So are
there policymakers that actually think that way?
I don't know about policymakers, but libertarians never get elected to office, right? So they're just a bunch of pundits and bloggers. But folks at the Cato Institute and some folks in my own department will get very excited about the prospect of low-skill immigration because they think that that'll create an ethnic backlash, and that ethnic backlash will and a rise in ethnic hatred will indirectly weaken the welfare state, and that's great news for them. As long as you see, if weakening the welfare state is your most important goal, and you don't think there are going to be any other important consequences, well, good for you, yeah. But it's worth thinking through whether that will have other unintended consequences. I mean, the academic research into social conflict was once rife with the term ethnic conflict, right? And so ethnic conflict as one of many causes of civil wars, for instance. And so, human beings have found a lot of things to fight over the centuries, but ethnic conflict is another one of them. And whether it's a low-grade ethnic conflict or a full-blown civil war, those are things I think to be avoided.